Equality has a property for multiplication that's very similar to the one with addition, but there's one small warning. For any real number a that's not equal to 0, the equation x equals y is equivalent to the equation a times x equals a times y. Notice, this only works for numbers that are not 0. Why not 0? Well, if we multiply two expressions both by 0, we're just going to get 0 equals 0, which is not very interesting. And that's why multiplying both sides by 0 doesn't fly. Other than that, we can multiply both sides of an equation by the same non-zero number without changing the solutions. Let's see an example of that in action. Now, we know that 2 times 3 equals 6, just no matter what. We can multiply both sides of this by the same non-zero number, say -4, and we see -4 times 2 times 3 is equal to -4 times 6. Okay, that's not very interesting. More interesting is if we have, for example, x equals 5. If we choose to multiply both sides by 3, we'll see 3x equals 3 times 5. That is 3x equals 15. This first equation has an obvious solution, namely just what it says. And plugging that in down here, we see that 3 times 5 does indeed equal 15. Even more interesting than this is, well, what if we have this equation? 4/5 times x equals 8. And what if we were to choose to multiply both sides of this equation by 5/4? 5/4 is certainly a perfectly good non-zero number, but 5/4 times 4/5? Everything cancels. We're left with just 1 times x. 5/4 times 8, you can use a calculator for that if you'd like. That's 10. Here my only solution is x equals 10. And going back to our original equation, we see that 4/5 times 10 is indeed 8. Again, you can work that out on a calculator if you'd like. Now, there are a couple of things to note. First, just as subtraction inherited its properties from addition, division inherits its properties from multiplication. So, for example, if we have the equation 4x equals 3, and we choose to divide both sides by 5, that means multiply both sides by 1/5. So I'll have 1/5 times 4x equals 1/5 times 3. Using the associative property to group 1/5 times 4, we get 4/5 times x equals 3/5. Dividing both sides by 5 meant multiplying both sides by 1/5. Okay, another property that it's important to note has to do with how multiplication and addition interact. When we multiply an expression by some number, we must multiply the entire expression. So suppose we have this equation. We have the equation 4x minus 8 equals 12x plus 4, and we decide to multiply both sides by 5. If we want to write that in quickly without copying the entire row, we can just put the left-hand side in parentheses, with a 5 outside, right-hand side in parentheses with a 5 outside. But it's important to remember the parentheses because you are multiplying the entire expression on the left-hand side and the entire expression on the right-hand side, both by 5. We'll see an example without variables in a moment to see why that has to be so. Right, but now we use the distributive property. Right, everybody gets a 5 over here. Everybody gets a 5 over here. We'll have 20x minus 40 equals 60x plus 20. Why is it that we need to use the distributive property here? Right, we didn't need to use the distributive property here. Oh, well, the distributive property didn't apply, right? There was no addition. We didn't need to use the distributive property when we added a number to both sides. Well, that's because we were just adding a term. Right? The distributive property only applies when we have an expression with multiple terms that we want to multiply by something. Let's take a quick look at something with just numbers and see why this has to be so. Right? We know that 2 plus 3 equals 1 plus 4, right? But now, let's say we took it into our head to multiply both sides by 2. It wouldn't work to just say 2 times 2 plus 3 is 2 times 1 plus 4. Right, that's not true. 2 times 2 plus 3 is 1 plus 4 times 2? No, it doesn't work unless we multiply the entire side. We can work these out in two different ways. Just follow the order of operations or apply the distributive property, and we'll get 4 plus 6 is 2 plus 8. It only works if we multiply the entire side. If it's that way for numbers, it also must be that way for variable expressions, because the variables in variable expressions are just standing in for numbers.